Imagine fighting in an unpopular war and coming home to a hostile or uncaring public. Now imagine you show up to a comrade's home only to find out that he had died a year before. Now imagine that you are a 40-year-old sheriff, veteran yourself, going through a divorce, and being the big fish in a small pond. Now imagine what happens when these two men cross paths. That is the basic premise of David Morrell's First Blood, later adapted to screen by Ted Kotcheff and Sylvester Stallone. The film that would start the Rambo franchise and go on to make billions was at its core a film about a generational conflict. Two men, one returning Vietnam veteran, and the other a sheriff who served in the Korean War. Last year I did a video on my second channel, Gear Issue 33, explaining the differences between the book and the film, but in this video we're going to be focusing more on the characters themselves. Almost like a bit of a character analysis, and yes, I will be drawing some from the book, but I'm also going to be placing a heavy emphasis mid-video on the character of Colonel Troutman, not just Rambo and not just Teasel. And of course, we shall get to the divide, which of course is a generational one. And why so much of the source material was changed for the film. Now, before we fully dig into this, make sure you guys please hit the like button. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. And let's go ahead and get into it. But first, let's go ahead and just do a very quick plot run through for you guys. Spoilers, but I advise you guys go watch this movie. Arriving at fellow comrade Delmore and Barry's home, Rambo learns that his friend has died of cancer. He then travels on foot, distraught of course, where he is given a ride by Sheriff Wilford Teasel. Teasel, not too thrilled with Rambo's appearance, believing him to be a vagrant, drifter type, drives Rambo out of town. Rambo, hungry of course, a little confused, and also a little bit angry with the cold treatment, feels like he's been pushed and heads back in town, where he is ultimately arrested by Teasel and eventually brought in. Rambo is ultimately booked, questioned, and eventually mistreated by the deputies in the department, Deputy Galt in particular, especially during the shower sequence where they choose to shower him with a fire hose. Then they attempt to shave him, where his PTSD is triggered, thinking back to an incident that occurred in Vietnam when he was locked up in a VC camp. Rambo eventually beats the hell out of the deputies, getting the upper hand, escaping the jail, and then he escapes the town. He is chased by Teasel and a manhunt ensues. Galt eventually arrives on a helicopter as Rambo is trying to get away, and he attempts to kill Rambo on sight while the other deputies are trying to simply go about this the right way. Rambo eventually jumps atop from a cliff and lands and ultimately injures himself, but is still able to fight off Galt and the chopper. Now, I want to say this really quick. You will hear me say this at least a few times over the course of this review. Rambo kills absolutely nobody in this movie, unlike the book. The deputies eventually arrive and Rambo comes out and tries to communicate with the officers. Of course, seeing Galt's body, they get pretty upset and they choose not to really have any conversation with Rambo, regardless of whether Rambo may be trying to turn himself in or not. The deputies eventually take shots at Rambo from the top of the cliff. Rambo gets away, and eventually Teasel is informed of who Rambo is. A Green Beret, Vietnam veteran, and Medal of Honor winner.
A guy to mess around with. Just came over the teletype a few minutes ago. John Rambo is a Vietnam vet. He's a Green Beret, Congressional Medal of Honor. Guy's a war hero. Jesus, that freak!
He chooses to lead the deputies into the forest that evening, and let's just say this ride did not go too well for the deputies, especially Teasel, as we'll get to here in a second. Rambo lays traps, maims the men. Once again, nobody dies, unlike in the book, and eventually Rambo and Teasel do have a bit of a face-off. Well, it's really more Rambo just pinning Teasel up by a tree, and he informs him that out here in the wilderness, he is the law. And not to push this any further.
Don't push it, I'll give you a war you won't believe. Let it go.
The following morning, Teasel, at the makeshift headquarters with the state police and the National Guard, vents his frustrations about the situation that had occurred involving Rambo. This right here is when Colonel Troutman arrives to inform them that they have a bit of a problem here, and that he is here to save them from him, not the other way around. We shall talk about Troutman more in detail soon, but eventually a trap is set, that right there being that Rambo is contacted by Troutman, and Rambo, of course, informs Troutman that he will not be turning himself in because it was the police, that right there being this king shit cop, Wilfred Teasel, who started this entire issue. Meaning Teasel drew first blood, but we shall talk about Teasel in more detail here in a second and why he drew first blood. Rambo, spending the next day or so trying to evade the National Guard, eventually gets into a position where he is pinned down by the National Guard inside of what would be later on revealed to be a rat cave. In the book, it was a bat cave and a mine, but if you guys have seen the movie, then you know where this right here is going. Ultimately, the cave is blown up by the National Guard, and Rambo eventually escapes into the cave. Arriving back in town, distraught, tired, all that type of stuff there, the normal type of stuff that you would expect after going through a long, arduous process, Teasel is shocked and surprised to find out that Rambo is in fact alive. He has stolen a semi and is on his way to town, where Rambo proceeds to destroy as much property as one can destroy without actually killing anyone, and then eventually the two have a one-on-one face-off inside the sheriff's department where Rambo gets the upper hand. Rambo, looking like he wants to finish Teasel off, is eventually approached by Troutman, and then of course if you know the rest of the film, then you know about the meltdown that Rambo has. That right there was just a quick basic run through of the plot. So let's go through some of the details which kind of lets us know that this particular story is a story about the generational gap between these two men, and we're going to start this by talking about both Rambo and Teasel. Teasel first. Let's start with Teasel, and yes, I'm going to go to the book for a very quick second. In the book, Wilfred Teasel is the chief of police of Madison, Kentucky, number one. Number two, he's 40, he's going through a divorce. It's revealed in a conversation with Orville early in the book, which I'll talk about the book a little bit later on towards the end of the video, that he believes the reason why the divorce is happening is because he actually wants children. He's also a prior service Marine, fought in the Korean War. He's a veteran of the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, one of our signature battles. So, therefore, he's a little bit more, he's a little bit more complicated. Also, at the exact same time, not only is he a little bit more complicated, but he's also a little bit, I would say he's a little bit more likable once you get about, I'd say, a third of the way into the book. The book, by the way, shifts the perspectives between Teasel and Rambo. It's kind of like Hunter, Hunted, and don't worry, we'll talk about Rambo here shortly, but still the point is this right here. He's a much more likable character, even though he does initially come off as a bit of a jerk. Where in the film, he seems like he's a little bit more to stretch the law. Like, for example, and of course you guys have seen right here in the B-roll footage, the treatment of Rambo, not only inside the jail, but also in the car. I mean, the only thing Rambo wanted was something to eat, and of course Rambo seemed a little bit confused when he was asked about where he was going, and of course Rambo had responded with Portland. Well, originally what he said was going north, and then he said Portland after he was pressed again. And Teasel said, hey, look, Portland's south. The point is this right here. Rambo didn't really know where he was at. He'd been walking the entire time. He just got through leaving a comrade's home. He was a little bit distraught over the news of hearing about Delmore and Barry's death. And you figured that Teasel would have done at least a little bit more as far as showing a little bit more compassion, given the fact that Rambo is clearly wearing a U.S. Army service fatigues, and of course the American flag. Maybe this guy's a veteran. Teasel obviously did not choose to do that, and of course it showed throughout the film, because the more and more that you watch the film, the more and more you kind of see that Teasel is a bit of a jerk. Now there's going to be a little bit more on that a little bit later when we get to Troutman, but yeah, it seems like he's just an unempathetic jerk. So the generational problem is this here. First and foremost, as I mentioned before, Teasel is a Korean War veteran. Korea is a forgotten war, and we should always remember our Korean War vets, and of course that war did not end with U.S. victory. It ended in a bit of a stalemate. Still, the generation that fought in that war would be classified into the silent generation, those born from beyond 1928, at least until the end of World War II, roughly 1946. Baby boomers, Generation X, all that type of stuff there. We may do a bigger video on that at a later date, talking about generations. But the thing is this right here. Teasel's generation was taught that the minute you get back home and you go find a job, you go to work, basically is a reason why it was called the silent generation. You do not complain. Rambo, on the other hand, is a Vietnam veteran, and what's really sad about Vietnam vets is that while they get credit for a loss, they really and truly did not actually lose the war. The politicians lost that war, not the men, and a lot of these men coming home from deployments, they weren't getting any favors from either side. And what I mean by that is this here. On one side, you've got hippie protesters, left-wingers, who are protesting you, calling you imperialists, baby killers, all that type of stuff. There's stuff that Stallone had talked about in his interview with Studio Canal, and also at the same time in the DVD commentary, which I'll be bringing back up again momentarily. Basically an uncaring, unempathetic public that was even hostile, where it is that Teasel, on the other hand, as I mentioned before, he was coming back home to a much more accepting public. And one more thing too, kind of going back to what I was saying about the protesters, even those who were not protesters kind of viewed what was going on in Vietnam as a bit of a lost cause, and they viewed men like Rambo as a bit of a scourge of society, so therefore they kind of shunned them, as if to say that it's because of wusses like you that we lost this war. Essentially, Teasel's generation resents Rambo's generation. And this right here even seems somewhat reflected in Teasel's attitudes, especially towards Rambo in their initial encounter. I just figured I would say that before we go any further. But that right there brings us to the next character in this story, who I personally believe is the anchor of the entire series, and that sounds kind of odd given the fact that Sylvester Stallone is Rambo, but Colonel Troutman. So when we meet Colonel Troutman, it's this scene right here, which I'm going to play some of it for you guys, and also at the exact same time I'm going to kind of put a header over it to kind of avoid copyright. But he's basically explaining to Teasel that, yeah, I'm here to save you guys from him, not the other way around.
Best. With guns, with knives, with his bare hands. A man who's been trained to ignore pain, ignore weather, to live off the land, to eat things that'll make a billy goat puke. In Vietnam, his job was to dispose of enemy personnel, to kill, period. Win by attrition. Well, Rambo was the best.
Okay, so you guys obviously heard all of that, talking about how great Rambo was trained, but then again, at the same time, though, there's also this little banger here of a line.
You want a war you can't win?
Are you telling me that 200 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us?
You send that many, don't forget one thing.
What?
A good supply of body bags.
A good supply of body bags is definitely one of the best one-liners in probably all of action films. However, here's the thing about Troutman, and I'm going back to the book. I think that the book, the conversation that he had with Teasel in that little part, and don't worry, like I may have said before, I'm going to link the audiobook in the description box. I think that this right here sums up exactly the situation as is, and yeah, there's definitely a lot to learn from this. This right here is a reading from the book. It's roughly 2 minutes and 9 seconds. Don't worry, you guys will be able to figure out who is Troutman and who is Teasel, but here you go.
That's just stupid. I hardly told you anything about him. Maybe some party game psychiatrist could build up a theory about his mother dying of cancer when he was young, his father being an alcoholic, about when his father tried to kill him with a knife, and how he ran from the house that night with a bow and arrow that he shot at the old man, nearly killing him. Some theory about frustration and repression and all that. How there wasn't enough money to eat and he had to quit high school to work in a garage. It would sound logical, but it wouldn't mean anything. Because we don't accept crazies. We put them through tests, and he's as well-balanced as you or I. I don't kill for a living. Of course not. You tolerate a system that lets others do it for you. And when they come back from the war, you can't stand the smell of death on them. At the start, I didn't know he was in the war. But you saw he wasn't acting normally, and you didn't try very hard to find out why. He was a vagrant, you said. What the hell else could he have been? He gave up 3 years to enlist in a war that was supposed to help his country, and the only trade he came out with is how to kill. Where was he supposed to get a job that needed experience like that? He didn't need to enlist, and he could have gone back to work in the garage. He enlisted because he figured he was going to be drafted anyhow, and he knew the best trained cadres that gave a man the best chance to stay alive didn't take draftees, only enlisted men. You say he could have gone back to the garage. That's some cold comfort, isn't it? 3 years, and he gets a Medal of Honor, a nervous breakdown, and a job greasing cars. Now you talk about fighting him 1-to-1. Yet you imply there's something diseased about a man who kills for a living. Christ, you haven't fooled me. You're as military as he is, and that's how this mess got started.
And it wasn't so much the stench of death, it was really more the stench of defeat. Go back to what I was saying earlier. The truth is this right here. Rambo's generation was being hit by the left, the hippie protesters, the anti-war crowd, but they were also being hit by the people who may have actually supported and voted for the war, viewing these people as, how do I say this, weak. Viewing them as the reason why it is that not only did we lose the war in Vietnam, but also the reason why it was the society itself was so screwed up at that time. They viewed them as entitled, they viewed them as weak, when in reality, it's more likely that the Vietnam veteran, who by the way was probably the greatest trained veteran this country ever produced, was in fact very, very much a badass, and it wasn't his fault that the war was lost. And there's something else to consider about Rambo. You find out on like 2 or 3 separate occasions, once in the cave, you find out sort of at the very beginning of the movie, and of course you find out in the ending scene with Troutman, that Rambo is the last of a unit. He's the last one. He has to carry on. So any type of, let's just say, thoughts of self-harm, which of course you have to be careful about here on this platform, because YouTube will find a way to dox the video, or they will find a way to knock the video in the algorithm if you lean into a certain direction or talk about certain things. You got to think about the amount of pressure that's on him, especially dealing with the fact that he's not getting any support from either side of the aisle. You've got the protesters who don't like the fact that he served in the military, served in Vietnam. You've also got these who feel like they failed in Vietnam. So you got to kind of think about that. And then to go on top of that, kind of like he said in his meltdown, he can't even find a job or hold a job parking cars. This right here is exactly how it was back in the days when guys were coming back home. And it's very, very sad to see that this right here was a period that we went through in our nation's history. And there's also something else too, and I want to talk about this really quick before we go any further, before I talk about Rambo, and it's this right here. There are 2 scenes where Teasel's, in particular, I would say where Teasel's attitude about Rambo really comes out. For example, there's the sequence after the National Guard blows up the cave. Teasel seems quite jovial about the fact that Rambo has possibly been killed. I mean, the thing is this right here. Teasel acts as if to say Rambo wasn't shit. Which is also kind of funny too, given the fact that throughout the entire book and also at the exact same time, he refers to Rambo as simply the kid. There was even the scene inside the hotel bar, and there's even a deleted portion of this that you guys will see in the B-roll footage here in a second, where Teasel basically acts as if to say he was robbed of his opportunity and his chances to kill the kid.
Like you were cheated out of your chance. I wanted to kill that kid. Well, I wanted to kill him so bad I could taste it.
Doesn't sit well with that badge.
And of course, Troutman calls him out on this, where basically saying it doesn't sit well with that badge. It makes you wonder exactly what kind of person Teasel is at his actual core, at least the movie version of it. Which is also interesting because if you rewatch the scene over and over again, and I'm showing it to you guys in the B-roll footage, you can see when Teasel gets upset, you can see Teasel's face begin to shift as if to say he knows that people could be watching. I mean, remember, he is the sheriff, okay? Sheriffs are elected. It's a political position. But anyway, that brings us to Rambo. So, really quick, John Rambo, Sylvester Stallone's portrayal. As he said in his interview with Studio Canal, he wanted to portray Rambo more as a victim than anything else. The reason why is because the book version of Rambo was exactly what he had said, non-refundable.
But he draws the line. In the book, Rambo was a savage, complete sociopath and psychopath, and had to be put down. And I felt that's really not the right portrayal of our servicemen. And I thought, can we just...
To be killed like an animal himself because he could never go back to society. So when I got the script and I started working with it, I said, let's make him more of a victim, a fellow who wants to get back in society, but society won't let him. So at the end, I wanted him to have an emotional death where he cries out, I can't find my legs, all my friends. But physically, he stays alive. Because many Americans were coming back and so depressed the way America was treating them, calling them baby killers and warmongers, they killed themselves. So I thought, I don't want that message. I don't want I didn't want these men to come back with
a savage, a sociopath.
Headed
Don't
north
worry,
or south?
It'll be linked in the description box from
North.
Stallone's interviews. And of course, you guys will probably hear some here in a second. The point is this right here. The version of Rambo in the book was troubled. He wasn't trouble. And that's basically what Troutman was trying to get to when he was basically telling Teasel, look, this kid was troubled, but he wasn't exactly trouble itself, and you labeled him as troubled. Yeah, that right there is the biggest reason why this entire situation got out of hand. And while Rambo definitely did some pushing of his own, yeah, it seems to me like maybe he was correct in the fact that, yeah, that king shit cop Teasel, he's your first blood. Of which, by the way, if you read the book, you see that it's very, very much exactly what this video has been about. It's been about resentment between generations. It's been about a generational struggle, a generational conflict. Which, of course, is something that came up, obviously, when these guys chose to rewrite from the source material, which I'll get to here in a second. But the thing is this right here. This entire situation could have been avoided if somebody had just simply taken the time and just simply, I don't know, asked a few more questions and not been so much of a jerk. And there's one more thing, too. This bit about Rambo not being able to refit back into society, this right was brought up in the second film, which of course has always been viewed to be the weakest film in the series. I personally don't feel that it is. I may even do a video on ranking, but that right there will probably be it on Gear Issue 33 when I review the entire series. But the point is this right here. Obviously, rewrites needed to be done because this right here was not a character that you could actually sell. As a matter of fact, they even did a death scene, which of course got, let's just say, they did not go over well with test audiences. And of course, Stallone obviously chose to remove any bits of where Rambo killed any police officers. As you guys obviously saw earlier, he maims, he sets traps for them, he hurts them, but he doesn't kill anybody. Galt's death was done mostly by accident. It was his own fault that he got killed. I mean, seriously, he ran up on Rambo, got closer, got outside the helicopter, aimed down range, and Rambo just simply threw a rock at the helicopter, and Galt fell because he was an idiot and didn't have himself strapped into the helicopter, and therefore he obviously fell out and hit the ground below and died. Nevertheless, still, why did they change it? Well, at the time of the book's release, it was roughly about a year after it hit bookstores that they had already been shopping this story around in Hollywood. It got around to several actors, several directors. It got to Al Pacino, who demanded that the character be turned more into a psycho killer. Robert De Niro was offered. He was offered the role at one point in time. Harrison Ford was offered the role. Even Christopher Reeve, Clint Eastwood, and Gene Hackman were offered roles in this film. The screenplay went through 30-some-odd rewrites, and ultimately it was the Sakon-Bozell script that was ultimately chosen. And by the time it even got to Sylvester Stallone, he had been, let's just say, it fell to Stallone because nobody else could actually make this script work.
Nobody wanted to do this movie. It was a cursed project that had been through the most elite actors from top to bottom. And then it finally got to me. And I looked at this and I went, wow.
Was every actor. They had, I was like the last actor. They had Nick Nolte, Al Pacino, they wanted De Niro, they wanted Robert Redford, Jimmy Caan. So every actor wanted a different version. They couldn't figure it out.
I just figured I'd put that little bit in there from the interview. So Stallone got a hold of this and obviously did some rewrites to it, did some rewrites to the character, removed the fact that they were killing a bunch of cops. They chose to go with the whole option of just simply maiming and injuring people. And of course, there were also all kinds of other conflicts on the set. For example, Kirk Douglas was supposed to play the role of Colonel Troutman. Douglas did not like the way that this film was ending, so he rewrote the script, gave his opinions, and eventually Ted Kotcheff, Sylvester Stallone, Buzz Feinstein's, the overall crew itself, said, no, we're going to go with the ending that Sylvester Stallone has written.
And not a bad, they did a good job, but it wasn't what we had agreed to do.
There were some changes that were to be forthcoming, and I guess he felt that they weren't done to his liking, or they weren't done the way he thought they should be done.
He goes, no, Rambo must die. Rambo must die. I said, I understand that, but not in this movie.
Big revelation to people who don't know the novel. At the end, Rambo dies. Colonel Troutman, the man who created him, he's the guy that kills Rambo.
I just don't think it should be done. It sends out the wrong message. I mean, every Vietnam vet who sees this goes, oh, the only solution is that death is the only thing that awaits us at the end of the tunnel, and I don't think that's the right way to do it. He goes, yeah.
Which would turn out to be a good idea for Stallone
long
because
productions
he would
of
make
any
millions
movie
and
ever. I
millions
mean,
and
went
millions
through
of dollars off
10
the franchise.
directors.
And I have to say to you guys that this film would not have worked if it had been anybody besides Richard Crenna playing Colonel Troutman. Just saying. Which brings me to the last bit, and that right there, of course, is the soundtrack. This to me is some of Jerry Goldsmith's best work, and he has a filmography of music that you guys can check out, several films, but to me it's the Rambo series where he shines the brightest, especially here in the first. Absolutely phenomenal soundtrack work there. Well, guys, that right there just about wraps it up. If you guys can, please hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you guys for sticking around for the full video if you guys did so. If you guys can, once again, still please hit the like button, subscribe, share, and thank you guys once again for sticking around. And I shall see you guys later.